Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari.
Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. On behalf of ISKCON Ministry of Education, we welcome you all. And today we are very happy and honored to have with us His Grace Kripanidhi Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you. It's a nice title, nice topic.
Yeah, books are the basis, the importance of the books. Kripanidhi Prabhu is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, originally from Canada, Toronto, received his first Back to Godhead magazine around 1968. Then later on in 1972, in Portland, Oregon, received initiation from Srila Prabhupada. And basically, since that time, like almost 50 years now, this dedicated his life and serving, especially in book distribution. And now lives in Mayapur. And there he's also doing Harinam book distribution, guiding devotees, inspiring devotees with Zoom classes. So we're very happy to have you with us, a devotee who has dedicated his life and always centered around Srila Prabhupada's books. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. Would you like to share with us, how did you came in? I mean, I mentioned you came in touch with the Back to Godhead magazine. Do you remember something from the first contact with Prabhupada's writings, Prabhupada's books? What was the first book that you read and how did it change your life?
I would say that once I went to the temple in Vancouver in February 1972, I would, Bhagavatam class was very nectarine. It was, we were studying the 16th chapter, around that area, the 8th chapter, something like that, the first canto. So it was a lot of really relishable topics in that part of the Bhagavatam. And it was very intriguing for me because of the social commentary. And it was always in the back of my mind looking at society and critiquing it as I was in the hippie movement. So it was a perfect match. When I received the Back to Godhead in Toronto, honestly, I didn't read it. But subsequent to that, I did receive prasadam at rock concerts in Canada and the US. I would go to rock concerts or musical festivals, which was a big element of the youth movement was the music and the artists. So I got prasadam. I think that purified me. Yeah. So the taste for reading Prabhupada's books was quite strong once I joined in Vancouver, and also attending Prabhupada's lectures in Portland, Oregon at the time in 1972. I always relished philosophy and history, especially in school. So yeah, the more we would perform book distribution, it seems the more thirst we had, or I had for reading and absorbing myself in Srila Prabhupada's books. And we're very eager to memorize Ishopanishad. I remember memorizing some of the first verses of the Ishopanishad as in the beginning of my devotional service, and then moving on into the Bhagavad Gita. So it was a nice balance between, it was kind of a symbiotic relationship between distributing books or distributing the holy name and preaching, and also absorbing and assimilating the knowledge in Srila Prabhupada's books. It was very potent. I think that, when we sing Yasya Prasadat Bhagavat Prasado, the more we please the spiritual master, the more we're able to imbibe this knowledge, So that's the way it went. I spent a lot of my life as a brahmachari, which was about 10 years, inside of a van with another brahmachari, crisscrossing the continent. And we always would read to each other. We're always reading. As soon as Prabhupada came out with a Bhagavatam, we would get it and we'd start reading it to each other. And that's how it went. I think every few months. Yeah.
That must have been quite a special occasion whenever Prabhupada would, when a new book would be coming out, right? I mean, for us, we can't imagine, but that must have been quite a... So that culture of eagerly reading Prabhupada's books was there from the very beginning. You experienced it like that, right?
Yeah, I really didn't have to force myself. I think that, they say the brahmachari lives in the ashram of the spiritual master. There was some kind of adjustment coming out of this youth movement, and having rejected material knowledge and so on, I was really not. I was in college, but I couldn't digest engineering. It was just like I couldn't take it. I was constipated on it. But with Prabhupada's books, we just drank the nectar constantly and really absorbed the philosophical understanding that Srila Prabhupada was giving us. It was really a very exciting time for us, and always looking forward to Prabhupada's next Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah, certainly I like to get back to this point of the connection between reading and preaching. But maybe first, you could just, in general, tell us why do you think it's so important to read on a daily basis regularly? What's the importance of that? Why should we do it?
I experienced personally that Srila Prabhupada is in every single word of his books. And when I'm reading, I can almost hear Srila Prabhupada's voice. Wow. It's quite mystical. But I feel Srila Prabhupada's presence reading his purports, and therefore I'm associating with the great Acharya and, of course, his predecessors. So we have to really saturate. I found I have to saturate my mind with these words of Srila Prabhupada, which are, Prabhupada said, they're, written by Krishna, and he was the instrument, So we're actually associating every day. Prabhupada is kind of writing us a letter. Here's the letter today. Currently, I'm reading the 8th canto, The Demigods and Demons Churning, the Ocean of Milk, and they're warring between each other. It's actually very exciting. There's Prabhupada said, we like to hear about wars and fighting and conflict. We like to hear about romance, but this is spiritual and intrigue. There's so much intrigue in Srila Prabhupada's books with the Lord Indra stealing horse or some, all these various stories of intrigue and so on. So, and the adventures also. So I guess you have to I developed a taste for reading Prabhupada's books, especially Srimad Bhagavatam. I also like to read the Krishna book, Nectar of Devotion, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. Those are my 4 main books of reading. Yeah.
So, it's quite impressive. You have met Srila Prabhupada, and almost 50 years later, you're still reading his books. And from your experience, it's the way you connect and associate with Prabhupada. That's certainly very inspiring. We also say that through reading, we develop a certain way to see the world. We have that term, the Shastra Chakshu, that we start to see the world through the eyes of scriptures. I'm sure as a book distributor also, you must have a lot of experience in this regard. You like to share some realizations on how reading Prabhupada's books changes the way we see the world?
That's a good question. Especially, Prabhupada said these books are non-different from Lord Krishna or Narayan. So when you're on the road a lot and you're practically living with Prabhupada's books, you're associating with a deity. The Bhagavatam is like the deity incarnation of the Lord. So we're actually, anywhere we are, if we have Srila Prabhupada's books at hand, we can associate with the deity of the Lord in his book form. If we, somehow or other fail to make a habit of reading Srila Prabhupada's books, inadvertently or even unintentionally, then the mind becomes attracted to absorbing in mundane topics and so on. You either fill your cup with the nectar, or your cup will become full of ink. So it's very important to associate with the pure devotee through his Vani. It's extremely important. In fact, the Prabhupada said Vani is more important than the Vapu. Definitely so. I only saw Srila Prabhupada in his living form about 5, 6 times. And that taste comes from pleasing him. Shishusho Shradhajanascha Vasudeva Kata Ruchi. That Ruchi comes from pleasing the spiritual master to whatever capacity or guna and karma is. I may be a pujari or cook and so on. Head temple commander, a administrator, or I may be, in my case, I like preaching a lot, just conveying knowledge to young people especially, or to people in general. So the more we try, I find the more strength and ability we have. And Prabhupada made it clear, you're distributing my books, but you're not studying them. One has to become a master in understanding and conveying a philosophy to others. The basic philosophy should be there within our hearts and minds. So not only is it important to read Srila Prabhupada's books, but Prabhupada in his lectures always quotes as reference from his books. There are very many important verses that Prabhupada would quote in all his lectures. So memorization is also very important to convey it to others in an authoritative way. Yeah, that's our business. Our business as preachers or Brahmins or Vaishnava Brahmins is to expound this knowledge, to propagate this wisdom in a very authorized way. And I think that's why so many universities and so many scholars appreciated Srila Prabhupada's books. They're very authoritative. You don't see much of a vacillation in the clear consistency of the philosophy. There's no oscillation. It's very clear.
Yeah, it's a very transparent presentation of as it is, as Prabhupada said. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned about memorization of shlokas, which also brings us back to the original question in a sense of, you experience something in life and all of a sudden you remember a shloka. If you read a lot and you remember the shlokas, then something happened in life, then maybe you connect with a certain shloka that you read to what you experience. So that's also kind of...
Yeah, my favorite one is in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Yasmin nod vijite loko, loka nod vijite chaya. The devotee who pleases Krishna, he maintains equilibrium, sometimes honor, dishonor, fame, infamy. There's a string of verses, text 8 to 13. And it states that one who causes no anxiety to others or is never put into anxiety by others. And sometimes that's difficult, like someone may have commit an affrontal to me, like a hostility. And then, you want to react, but the transcendentalist, he sees it as, like the modes of material nature and so on. But it's difficult dealing with devotees or God brothers or fellow Vaishnavas sometimes to tolerate or forgive. So that's one of the, and so I would always remember that verse in the society of devotees, because, in a society like ISKCON, there's always some personality clashes. Until we're quite advanced devotees, there's going to be, and of course, Srila Prabhupada said, you Westerners or you Americans, you're very fond of changing things and fighting. Changing things and fighting, he said. So, yeah, it's very important in our society to cultivate tolerance of each other and see the good in all. And so many examples are there in Lord Chaitanya's Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that brings us back to the topic of book distribution. You mentioned that in these early days, as a brahmachari in a van, you were distributing books, but you also reading books daily. Would you like to share something about your realizations, like how, in order to actually preach, you also need to read, you need to be nourished yourself? Would you like to talk about this and some realization on that topic?
Yeah, when I was traveling, I would read about, chapter 16, first canto about Kali, the personality of Kali beating a cow. And in America and Canada, there's lots of cows on the highway being taken to slaughterhouse. So you get a lot of realizations about that. It is also very important to constantly be realizing that you're surrounded by people who are involved in pursuing material opulence and sense gratification. That's what the American dream is all about. So we'd constantly be reading to keep the mind in check about contemplation of sense gratification, because as brahmacharis, we were going to these rock concerts a lot. We were following all the big name groups and so on. I did live in Delhi for 6 years, and things changed. I started working at the top universities in New Delhi, opening up clubs, bhakti yoga clubs, and I opened quite a few of them. And that was a more intellectual time in my life, where I would, study books by Sadhaputta and so on. But I noticed I would drift over to more studies of the cosmogony in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto, and the explanation of how the universe, the origin of the universe, how the universe works, the size of the universe, and all these things. So because of that intellectual environment I was in at the universities, my attraction to different parts of the Bhagavatam would shift over. Describing what is consciousness to the students, or that, can machines think, artificial intelligence, and explaining to them about consciousness. So that was, again, a kind of a new arena for me. And it was very rewarding. It was also very stimulating to speak to highly intelligent students. Indian students are highly academic, and they get imported all over the world. So, yeah. And also I found that my university programs would inspire me to really memorize the verses, the key verses throughout the Bhagavatam and so on, because the students, they become very inspired and impressed when you quote Sanskrit and back up what you're claiming. You're not just speaking in a sentimental way. It's a scientific way, and they like science. I I would say, the word science comes from scientia, which is a Greek word which means to know. The root of the word science comes from this Greek word which means to know. So that's what they like. They like someone that would speak in a clearly objective and transparent way.
Mm.
So then I was studying, movement of the sun, the higher planets, middle planets, the Bhumandala, and the lower planets, the Patalas and the Atalatalas. And students would, they were intrigued to hear the Vedic perspective on the universe. And then, you could offer a argument or a polemic to the atheistic paradigm, the model of evolution or the model of the Big Bang or whatever new theory they had. So that was interesting. I also participated in the first World Congress of the Synthesis of Science and Religion. And those things are very stimulating and exciting to do. And again, you have to really know Prabhupada's books. So you're studying the books, you're absorbing this knowledge that Prabhupada's giving us. And then you're inspired to share the knowledge with everyone else, whether it's sometimes professors and scientific people and so on. So these things are all different tools that Srila Prabhupada gave us for spreading the movement, his books, and the ability to confront the modern atheistic worldview, which is very prominent, very, very prominent in the West. It's probably here too in India. Yeah.
Prabhu, if I'm listening from you, it becomes very clear that because you have such a taste in preaching and sharing, naturally you also read, you want to absorb, and then you share with others. What do you think? What's the reason why it seems that nowadays many devotees don't read so often anymore? I mean, there is a reason why we have this program here, Books Are the Basis. We try to encourage devotees to read more often. What do you think? What are the reasons why devotees maybe not reading so often? Because it seems from what you told us that in the beginning it was quite natural for devotees to, especially for the book distributors, to also read. And
I find for myself, I need a real balance. Just like when you're making a cake, you have the flour and the sugar and the water, et cetera, and the flavoring, whatever flavoring you're going to give. So Krishna consciousness is a nice cake, and we have to have, first of all, honor the Brahma Muhurta hour. Therefore, the rounds will be very, very good before the ether becomes contaminated. We also were given the Pancharatriki system of deity worship. And deity worship certainly helps the mind to become clear enough that we can absorb this. So becoming, enthusiastic and involved in a Pancharatriki system, a part of our daily activities, is very important. Some deity worship. If I'm a householder, I personally am a householder, so I do have like some Shalagram Shilas and some Gornitai deities. And that helps the mind. It helps clear the mind. It helps the mind to focus and to become a little bit grounded. So it's not, flying around, as Arjuna says, Chanchala Himana Krishna, Chanchala. The other part of it is that Prabhupada did want us to become Madhyam and not remain as Kanishta, to go outside once we re-strengthen ourselves and, charge our batteries up every morning, that to go out and give it to the world, as Prahlad Maharaj says, certain transcendentalists want to live in the Himalayas, but he wanted to live in the cities and share this beautiful experience. And probably we used to call it, in the old days during Prabhupada's time, the ISKCON sandwich. So you have a good morning program, good sadhana. Then you distribute books, which is also a kind of sadhana. because when you're distributing the book, you really have to try and explain to them about reincarnation, karma, super soul, and the heart, and these things. So you're preaching, and you're getting the result of your own preaching. And then we come back in the evening, and we'd have, Arti and Bhagavad Gita study. It's also, Prabhupada used to say, I remember this because as brahmacharis, we used to want to study 4 hours a day and kind of, then go out in the streets. Prabhupada said, no. He said, you have Bhagavatam class in the morning, Bhagavad Gita at night, Nectar of Devotion, and if you have time, you study my other books. So he did emphasize conducting ourselves in a preaching mode, and that would actually inspire and empower us to really be able to absorb the knowledge that he's giving us. So if someone doesn't have a taste, maybe they should think about, trying to do some kind of an outreach program, because I found that really helps. And then when we distribute books, we get a taste to study them. And becoming Madhyamadikari. As we gradually evolve ourselves to Madhyam platform, and more attachment, and more ruchi, more taste, and more nishta. Nishta is being steady. Certainly, the modes of material nature, passion, ignorance will move away from us. And as we cultivate the mode of goodness, that is conducive to self-illumination. We become illumined. The knowledge is actually, a lot of it's in our hearts. But if we're associating too much with the modes, then it gets covered. That's what I find personally. Stay above the modes. Cultivate sattva gun, which is very helpful in a place like Mayapur. Is very powerful. The morning sadhana is very powerful here. And there's always opportunity to share this great movement of Lord Chaitanya, even with the local people. Yeah.
So, you mentioned about if one doesn't have so much taste yet, by sharing Krishna consciousness, then one also maybe gets an inspiration to absorb oneself more. And you also quoted that by actually serving the devotees, the Vaishnavas, that Kataruchi will come also. You mentioned that.
Yeah. That's my experience. That's my experience. And feeling the presence of Srila Prabhupada when we serve nicely. We feel, like Prabhupada used to say, I could feel my guru was always with me, my spiritual master was always with me in my journey of devotional service. Yeah, these are important things, just like the cake. There's so many ingredients in the cake, and you have to put them in the right order. You don't start with the icing. So, Jeev Jago, waking up early. I think Vaisheshika Prabhu also mentions about the importance of sadhana bhakti and getting up early, Brahma Muhurta, and so on. It certainly invokes a taste to really relish Srila Prabhupada's books. Yeah.
How would ISKCON be a different movement if devotees actually would read? Every devotee would read everything.
I think there would be a higher standard of Krishna consciousness for sure. There would be a lot more utsaha nischaya dharya tat karma pravartana. There'd be a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of more patience, especially with each other, and determination. Also, you become more determined. It's also important, I found, to chant very attentive japa. Which is very powerful in terms of facilitating one's ability to sit down and study Srila Prabhupada's books. The importance of focused japa, not offensive japa, is extremely important. And it's also helpful if we do it in a group. You see within the temple room, it's always more potent and powerful group japa than alone, solitary japa. I found anyway. And that helps again, it's kind of a driving engine for studying Prabhupada's books.
Now, slowly coming to an end of our conversation, reading is one thing, application is another one. How to make sure that we apply what we read? Prabhupada gave us so much knowledge, so much wisdom. What would you say? How to apply? Any advices?
I think that's the biggest challenge because, you can memorize and know a lot of Sanskrit verses. You can have read the philosophy. The application or the achar is more important than the prachar in many ways. There are many, many wonderful advanced devotees who are not highly scholarly, you might say. They're not big pandits, but their hearts are very pure and they implement the instructions of a spiritual master to a very high degree. And those are they're in a sense, they're the acharyas. They're yadyanacharati shreshtas. They're setting the tone, setting the example. So definitely implementation is very important. That comes basically from controlling the mind. The mind is the king of the senses. And especially in the Western environment, there's so many distractions. Prabhupada said there's so many distractions. How can someone survive as a brahmachari in a place like, Western Europe or Germany or America or Canada, where there's so much distraction for the mind? So taking shelter of devotees association and really good japa and these different ingredients is very, very important. And we can always reevaluate our devotional service sometimes. Where am I being a hypocrite? What am I doing that's hypocritical? Well, I got offended by this devotee and now I have a grudge, and then the fault finding follows. So kuti nati and all these. So these things are described, especially in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, how to associate with devotees, how to honor the holy name in a very respectful and humble way, therefore honoring and respecting my fellow Vaishnavas and keeping the mind under a very short leash. And that those are in my experience, accomplishing many things externally, we've seen that. And, sometimes leaders would think, I got to please Prabhupada. I've got to do so many books. I've got to make so many devotees. And that the sacrifice of or the devotees under the leadership or any devotees, sacrificing their internalization of Krishna consciousness is an item that I've observed over the years. We have to hunker down as well and make sure my spiritual devotional creeper is well nourished and taken care of. Yeah.
That's very inspiring to hear from, especially a senior devotee who has been preaching so much, that at the same time this introspection is important and that nourishment for one's own spiritual life. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for sharing your valuable time with us. Do we have any final message for us on this topic of how to in our reading or on the books or the basis? Any final message you'd like to share before we close?
Well, a little quip. A shloka a day keeps Maya away. That's what I always tell myself. At least shloka and purport a day keeps Maya away. Little things like this. go over the Bhagavad Gita before we sleep, or Krishna book a little bit, so the mind is nice and rest nicely when we go to sleep. Chapter a day. Vaisheshika advises chapter a day. Just read through the, the verses and so on. So very important. Very important. Yeah. And hopefully devotees will be more inspired to read Prabhupada's books, which is extremely important. Yeah. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. Srila Prabhupada is delivering us from impersonalism and voidism. And if we're not absorbing our minds in his books, then we can venture off or, drift off into kind of impersonal void. So it's very important. Yeah.
So
Hare Krishna.
That's a very beautiful point, that we want to be personal with Prabhupada, and also we should read his books to always stay in touch with him.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Kripanidhi Prabhu, for sharing your realization.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prema Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada. Jai.
Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.